Hello there. In this video I'm going to show you how you can make your own personalised pendant. In this case it's got the letter A in, but you can use any letter of the alphabet. And as you can see, I've got a couple of heart shapes wrapped around the outside of this pendant. And there is actually a sort of 3D element to this as well. And I'm going to use a Celtic knot pattern to create the interlocking heart shapes there. So we're going to do it in Fluid Designer for 3D printing, and we're going to use I'm going to use a couple of objects. I'm going to use one of these connectors here, which comes free with Fluid Designer for 3D printing. So that just is just where you put your chain through. I'm going to use a Harrington font, and I'm just going to stick the letter A. So I'm going to use this object here. I could use a Celtic knot pattern here, the three-dimensional one. Notice there are two here that look similar to each other. This is 301. Okay, so you can see that that's three-dimensional in a way. That one isn't. That's just a flattened version. So I could use those, but I'm actually going to show you in this video how you can use the Celtic knot curve to create this. So if I just go to File and New again, so first of all I'm going to go to Harrington fonts. I'm just going to drag and drop A onto the workspace there, so it's Harrington font A. Now this is a parametric smart object, so I'll just switch on screencast keys while I remember. So this has got a cross section of 1:2, so you could change the thickness of this. And you can do this later on, you don't have to do it now. But I'm going to stick to the default size there. So it's 1 millimeter there and 2 millimeters in thickness. If we look at the size of this, this is only 11 millimeters from top to bottom, so it's actually quite small. So I could scale this up. So if I press S on the keyboard for scale, and just move it, and I'm just watching the dimensions there go up to 18 millimeters, so I can do that. Now you must always remember in Fluid Designer, whenever you scale, do Control A and apply the scale, and notice that the thickness will return to the correct value that's here. If you don't do Control A and apply the scale, this value won't be valid anymore, and as you can see it's still 2 millimeters thick, so very important to do that. Okay, so I've just scaled it now, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a curve, and I'm going to use a Celtic knot curve. And as you can see, that appears in the middle of the screen there. Now I need to open up the toolbox panel here, because I'm just going to change a couple of values here. The first thing to note is that at the moment the thickness of this object is about 1 millimeter, and that's determined by this value here, 0.5. That's the radius, so 2 times 0.5 gives you a thickness of 1. If I take that down to 0, you can see that I go back to my raw curve there. Now what you can't quite see at the moment is that there are 2 copies of this going around, and you don't want that. You do need to change this back to 1, otherwise you could have some printing problems. But it's just best to do that. You don't want 2 or 3 or 4 copies of it. You want 1 copy. So you need to change that back to 1. Now I could also change the resolution. You can leave it 180. I'm actually going to take it right down to 30. And what that does is it reduces the number of control points. So if I'm not going to change anything else. Well, no, actually I do. I want to change the scale here at the moment. So if I change the scale here, you can see I can move it up so that it fits around my letter A. So I could scale it up there. Now I'm going to close the panel there. Now if I press the Tab key to go into edit mode, you can see the control points appear. And there are 30 of them because I set the resolution to 30 there. But you can leave it at 180 if you want. Now this is a smart object, so what that means is that if I go to in the properties panel, go to curve data, I can apply a thickness to it. and if I applied the same thickness as my letter A, that's what I get. So if I just view that from the top now, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to change this into a heart shape, and we can do that by going into edit mode. And if I just hold down the shift key and select the two control points at the bottom and drag the green arrow down, you can see I'm sort of creating a heart shape, but if you notice there's a circle here. Now that circle is proportional editing, and if I'm holding down the left mouse button and scrolling my center mouse button at the same time, and if you notice we're now, as it gets bigger, I'm also moving two of the bottom parts of my Celtic knot pattern. So I'm creating two hearts effectively. So I need to do two things at once: hold down the left mouse button and scroll the center mouse button. And then when I'm happy with the position of it and the shape of it as well, I can release that and press A on the keyboard to deselect those control points. Now I want to zoom in and I want to do the same thing at the top, and I'm going to use border select here. So if I press B on the keyboard for border select, I'll select those 4 control points there, and again I'm going to pull this down. Now this time I want to hold down the left mouse button, but I want to scroll inwards because I want to create a heart shape here. So I don't want it all the way out there. So reduce my proportional editing there, and when I'm happy with the shape, I can release it. Now I can press A on the keyboard to deselect those control points, and I can press the tab key to come out of edit mode, and I can reposition my heart now to wherever I want. So what I'm also going to do in this is just to show you that if I click on the letter A and press the tab key to go into edit mode, you can see there are control points there as well. And I'm going to do border select, and I'm going to select the control points at the bottom, and I'm just going to pull those down just to change the shape of my letter A. I'm just showing you that you can actually do it. You can do it all dynamically and see what you end up with. Probably just move it back up a little bit. So I've just elongated the original A, that's all. Okay, so I've got my 2 hearts wrapped around the letter A. Once you're actually happy with that and the position of the A relative to the hearts, you can actually join these 2 objects together. Now before I do that, I'm just going to demonstrate that this is really is a parametric smart object. If I change this one back to 1 by 1, so I'm changing the thickness of this, to join the 2 objects together, with the heart selected, if I hold down the shift key and click on A and go to Tools, Object, Tools and join them, when I do that, notice the heart shape thickness changes back to 1 by 2 again. It takes on the thickness of the A. If you actually want them to be different thicknesses, you would need to convert them to meshes separately before you join them together. If you join 2 smart objects together, they will take on the same cross-section, and they'll take on the cross-section of the last object you selected, which in this case was the Harrington font letter A. Alright, so but we can still play around with this because it is a smart object. If I press S on the keyboard and scale it up, and if I do Control A and apply the scale, it will reset the thickness, and I can also change the thickness over here to whatever I want, and it will apply it to all of the object here. So I'm going to set it back to 2 again, and I'm going to scale it back down again. Let me just double check the size. Yeah, 30mm, that's about okay. So Control A, and remember to apply the scale. Don't forget to do that, otherwise your dimension won't be correct here. Now the only thing I want to do now is to add a connector on the top, and I showed you that before, so it's in the connectors folder. So I'm going to add one of these connectors here, and we do that in Fluid Designer by going to File and Append, and if I just go up through the menu system until I get to the groups folder. You can see all the patterns and objects that are on your system that you can use. I'm going to use 3D templates connectors. I'm going to use a wire connector with a 2mm diameter hole, and I always append the object. So append that object, the wire connector, from the library. And oops, you do need to make sure you select it and get the yellow border around before you can actually do anything with it. I just need to rotate this about the Z-axis 180 degrees, and I just need to position it, and just need to zoom in until I get down to millimeters. You need to position it so that it is just fitting in there, and you can check that by going into wireframe. So you can see the bottom of this is inside my pendant now. And again, if I highlight that object, if I hold down the shift key and highlight my pendant and join them together, it will take on the thickness of the actual pendant, and the entire thing will be a parametric smart object. Now you do need to be careful that all of the objects are in fact connected, so that O in the middle is connected at the top here. If you're not happy about the thickness here, you could always change that. So if I go to View and Front, if I press the Tab key on the keyboard and press A on the keyboard to highlight all the control points, the blue arrow is the Z direction, and if I scale S on the keyboard and limit my scale to the Z direction, I can actually squash this object down and flatten it off a little bit. So if you don't want it sticking out too much, if you want to make it more flat, you can do that. Just do Control A and apply that scale so that you don't have any other problems in the future. So this is 33 millimeters depth, and all I need to do now is to export it to the desktop as a wavefront object. So I'm just going to call it Harrington Font A, and we just need to wait while that saves it to the desktop. Okay, so once it's actually saved to the desktop, what you need to do, and you always need to do this, you need to go to Netfab Basic and open it from the desktop. So it's Harrington Font A, I called it. And you must run all these objects through Netfab Basic. Fluid Designer for 3D printing is based on Blender, and it doesn't create absolutely perfect meshes. Alright, so we can use, so as you can see, I've got a warning red triangle in Netfab Basic, but I'm not worried. I just run the repair procedure, click update there, so there are some edges and some hole problems. Just run automatic repair. And because these are parametric smart objects and curves have been used, those values are all set back to 0, and you just apply the repair and remove the old part. And as you can see, my warning red triangle has now disappeared, so I just go to Part, export it as a wavefront object, and I'll just call it Harrington Font. Now you sometimes get a second error message here. It depends upon the geometry of the shape. But the trick in all of this is to keep your original design here as parametric smart objects, and keep them essentially as curves. So if I switch off the bevel object, you can see what we've got there. If I go into edit mode, they are curves. And by doing that, if you do have any slight problems in Netfab, just change the geometry of the shape slightly, and eventually you'll find a way that Netfab will fix it. And the beauty about this also is that here we've created a pendant. If we wanted to be really clever, what we could do is we could scale this down to, let's say, 30 millimeters, and remember to do Control A and apply the scale. Okay. And if we had some really nice printing equipment, we could change this bevel depth to a much smaller value than this. So if I just go to File, I'm just going to append some different cross sections. So oops, I want the rectangular ones. So if I just select these objects here, these are different cross section thicknesses for printing very small. So if I change my cross section to 0.6 by 0.6, that could be printed and could be made into an earring. And I've had to reduce the size because you've obviously got to keep the weight down if you're going to print an earring, but you do need some good printing equipment to be printing at this sort of size. I would need to change that hole as well if I wanted to make it into an earring. So that's the beauty about keeping it as a parametric object. Good luck with your designs.